Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Christian with Reaper Disc, and today I want to talk about one of the most overstable mid-ranges I've ever thrown, the Discmania Mutant. This disc truly is a mutant because a lot of times I didn't feel like I was even throwing a golf disc. I felt like I was throwing a manhole cover half the time when I threw this, and that is all by design. Discmania wanted an extremely overstable mid-range made to fight any wind condition and be the perfect upshot disc that is going to be very controllable, easy to range with very little to no glide, and a reliable fade that's going to fade every single time. So, a couple things about the Mutant, aside from it just being an extremely overstable mid-range. It's also a beaded mid-range, however, it doesn't really have a big obnoxious bead like a Gator or a Rock 3. Instead, it's kind of a medium-sized bead that still fits very comfortable in a forehand grip and doesn't really affect that much. Now, the biggest thing about the Mutant is that it is completely angular. Now, I'm going to try to get a picture of this to post up right here and kind of superimpose over this for a second. But there is not a single curve or curvature on this entire disc. The only thing rounded about this disc is the circle shape that it's in, and that's it. Every other line is a hard line with no, changes or curves in it at all. Every angle is a hard angle, and there's no rounded corners on this whatsoever. Which, that might be a little weird to some. It definitely was to me the first time I ever picked one up. However, it is very good at what it's used for. The thing is massively overstable, but because of that, it's incredibly reliable. No matter what you do or how you throw it, you know it's going to fade at the end. Unless you throw this thing at Mach 3 or above, even at Mach 2, it's still going to fade. But if you get it to Mach 3, then you might get it to straighten out. Other than that, it's going to be extremely overstable and fade every single time. Because of that, you can count on this disc every time you throw it to do this one thing and one thing only. So let's get into some of the test throws that I had with this. They all pretty well look the same, but we'll go through them anyway. When thrown on a hyzer, it hyzered. It's incredibly overstable. I think that the 3 glide rating that this has is a little generous. I think it's probably closer to a 2, maybe a 2.5 at most, but it had no glide to it. It just, as soon as it came out of my hand, it never left the angle that I put it on until it started getting more. Like, it didn't want to have any flip up whatsoever. It never even tried to get up to flat. However, once it came out of the hand, it just immediately started fading. And I can see a lot of uses with this disc of, you only have so far to throw and you can't out throw your target, otherwise you'd be in danger. If that's the case, this is definitely the disc for it because this has no glide. It's not going to pick up and carry further than what you intend it to. Even throwing full power, you're not going to get it to go very far. So, with the hyzer, it just hyzered. It didn't really change anything. Now, when I threw it flat, it did want to kind of go straight for a second, and that's about it. And then it started fading again. So, again, very reliable. I knew exactly what it was going to do. Now, throwing it flat, it did go a little further, and it almost stayed flat and hyzered gently for just a second, and then it kind of remembered what disc it was, and then just slammed back down into the ground. Now, thrown on anhyzer, it was laughable. As soon as I got it up in the air, once it got kind of to the apex of the flight, instead of, even trying to pan for a second, like most of the really overstable stuff that I've tested, instead of getting back to flat but panning from left to right a little bit, as soon as it got to the apex, it was already to flat and fading back to the left again. There was nothing I could really do to get this thing to turn over no matter what I tried. It was incredibly resistant to turn, incredibly resistant to torque, and just wanted to fade every single time. This got up to the apex, flexed out, and immediately came back to the ground. Now, when I threw this on power, I was able to actually get a good hyzer flip out of this, and it started cruising straight for a while, and I don't even know why I'm trying. It just faded. It did nothing but fade the entire time. It was very similar to the hyzer shot release because my power shots naturally release with a little hyzer. The exact same thing happened. Again, it never got any flip up. It just wanted to fade. It did feel like it wanted to punch forward a little bit because I had a little more power behind it, but it was still just crashing back down to the ground every single time. Now let's get into some of the uses of this disc. This is definitely not a beginner-friendly disc. I wouldn't even go so far as to say this would be friendly to intermediate players. However, a very good use for this disc would be short game approaches. Something that you know you can only go so far because danger is immediately behind, whatever your intended target is. This would be a good use for this. Now, I didn't really get a chance to test some of the ground action. The grass that I was throwing in is pretty thick and limits any ground reactions typically, but this may be a little skippy if it comes down on some hard pan on the right angles. However, I can pretty well say that once it hits the ground, it's probably not going to go too incredibly far. Now, other good uses for this would be an all-around just extreme wind fighter. Some of those winds that even your overstable stuff isn't quite enough for. This is going to be good for those. Also good for forehand approaches or extreme flex shots. Something that you have to start off near vertical, especially on a forehand, and count on it coming out of it, or at least panning back to flat, like some of those big long forehand anhyzer shots that you start nearly up and down and get it to pan out and get the flat and just coast back to the left. Now that is kind of a niche shot, but when it's needed, it's very useful to have, and I feel like this disc would be really good for that. Otherwise, this disc is it's good for what it's good for, and that is just being incredibly overstable. As a utility disc, this will probably be one of the best, just truly meaty mid-ranges that you could get your hands on in the entire sport of disc golf. Definitely one of the most overstable mids that I've ever thrown. And, that's going to start getting up to and rivaling things like the Stego as far as those really slow, overstable approach disc. This might be getting up to that level, though I don't quite think anything ever will truly be more overstable than the Stego, but it's not a disc. I refuse to acknowledge that as a disc. Other than that, the only other major thing about the Mutant is that it seemed to get more overstable the harder I threw it. Now, some off-camera shots, I tried to throw. I tried to blister the stamp off of this thing. I threw it as hard as I possibly could, and that's really, really hard. And it seemed every time I did, it got less glide and wanted to fade more, which is crazy because I'm pretty sure it just broke physics. Like, the whole physics just broke when I threw this disc. It did not want to do anything other than fade, and it seemed the harder I threw it, the more it wanted to. It goes against every, preconceived notion about how a disc could fly, which, when it all boils down to it, when you need something that no matter what is just going to fade, look no further than the Discmania Mutant. If you want a Mutant for yourself, click the link in the description of this video to head on over to reaperdisc.com to find one there. Follow us on social media at ReaperDisc. That way you can keep up to date with all of our exclusive drops, restocks, and new releases. Subscribe to the channel if you want to keep up with all of the new content that we're putting out, as far as disc reviews, tutorials, and other things like that. You'll see them here first. And honestly, if you guys have ever thrown a Mutant or not, or you just have an idea about what it could be used for, drop me a comment and let me know. I'm really, really curious to see what you guys think of this absolute manhole cover of a disc. And again, I'm Christian with Reaper Discs, and I'll see you guys in the next video.